Well, tonight, to our continuing expose of Anthony Albanese's history as a pro-Palestinian activist. I can reveal Albanese met with the late Palestinian president, Yasser Arafat, 2 years before he, Albanese, protested against Israel during the Second Intifada. And that was the violent Palestinian uprising that included terror attacks. Our now Prime Minister took part in a rally in Sydney where Israeli and American flags were burned. Albanese also met with Arafat, the terrorist turned president of the PLO, in Ramallah 2 years earlier in 1998. Unlike other politicians who met with Arafat, Albanese did not meet the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, it was Benjamin Netanyahu, or the Israeli President, Ezer Weizmann, on his trip to the Middle East. Albanese was on a trip sponsored by the Palestine Liberation Organisation, and it was all expenses paid, including flights and accommodation. Sources who knew Albanese at the time told me he was starry-eyed and fawning at the prospect of meeting Yasser Arafat. Here is a photograph that captured that moment. You can see Albanese sitting on the far left of the screen. Next to him is a former Labor MP, Leo Maclay, who was strongly anti-Israel. Then in the centre, there's Arafat. To the right of Arafat is one of his advisors, who then sits next to the former Palestinian delegate, or ambassador in inverted commas, Ali Kazak. And then on the far right of your screen is Joe Hockey, who was also on the trip. Joe Hockey's father was born in the Palestinian territories, and he and Albanese set up the Australian Parliamentary Friends of Palestine group together. National Party MP Peter McGauran, who'd worked on a kibbutz in Israel and had visited Israel on many occasions, was also present. I asked the Prime Minister's office about the meeting, and a spokeswoman said it was a widely reported cross-parliamentary trip to Egypt, Jordan, Gaza, West Bank and Israel. The majority of people on the trip were Liberal and National MPs. Well, during the Palestinian-sponsored trip, Albanese and the group also went to a dinner in Gaza, which I'm told was attended by about 60 PLO officials, all men. As I mentioned, the group did not meet with the then Israeli Prime Minister or Israeli President. At the time, Albanese was an activist for the Palestinian cause. 2 years later, while Arafat was president, the Second Intifada rocked Israel. More than 1,000 Israelis were killed in the violent uprising, which included Palestinian terror attacks where suicide bombers killed innocent families, including a busload of people. There was also violence and threats against Jewish institutions here in Australia. But during the Second Intifada, according to left-wing news website Crikey, Albanese joined pro-Palestinian protests against Israel, where American and Israeli flags were burned.
The response of Israel has been to meet children throwing rocks with helicopter gunships, with tanks and with missiles.
Now, that vision we first obtained here on this show, but Crikey placed it to during the Second Intifada. And as you saw, that was Albanese yelling into the megaphone at the protest when Israelis, at the time, during the Second Intifada, Israelis were being killed in suicide bombings. In a speech Albanese gave that same month, again during the Second Intifada, Albanese in Parliament spoke about Israeli aggression.
Palestinians live with restrictions every day. Gaza and the West Bank are regularly closed, preventing Palestinians from going to work and creating a subsequent resentment. Roadblocks occur at regular intervals. The hotel in Ramallah, the City Inn, where I stayed with Peter Nugent, who's present here in the House, and also Joe Hockey, Peter McGauran and Leo Maclay, has been occupied by the Israeli Defence Force and used by snipers on the West Bank. Palestinians do not have equal rights in the Middle East.
So, as you saw there in that parliamentary speech in October 2000, Albanese referred to his trip 2 years earlier, but as far as we can see, he's not in recent years referred to his meeting with Arafat. But in the wake of October 7, the former Palestinian delegate, Ali Kazak, who took Albanese to meet Arafat and was featured in that photograph, well, he made the picture public. He published the photograph taken of the meeting and wrote under the image, and he wrote this on October the 21st, 2023, and I quote, "In Gaza's hour of need, what would President Arafat today make of Albanese's one-sided support for Israel's right to defend itself, a right denied to Palestinians in decades of Israeli occupation?" Gaza's hour of need. Well, that was October the 21st, 2023, just weeks after the brutal and barbaric Hamas attacks of October the 7th. Albanese's views at the time were out of step with many of his Labor colleagues. Just a year before Albanese met with Arafat, the former Deputy Prime Minister, Tim Fischer, had invited Arafat to visit Australia. But then he was forced to rescind the invitation. And the invitation was described by Labor MP Laurie Brereton as an embarrassment. Have a look at this footage from 1997.
Acting Prime Minister, would you agree that consistency is an important element in the conduct of a nation's foreign relations? Why did you invite the Palestinian President, Mr Yasser Arafat, to visit Australia as a guest of government when you met with him in Bethlehem on the 13th of March? Did you obtain the agreement of the Prime Minister before you extended the invitation to Mr Arafat? Is it not a fact that last Thursday the government withdrew that invitation? Acting Prime Minister, what has changed since you met Mr Arafat on the 13th of March, and how do you explain this latest embarrassment to our international relations?
With regard to Yasser Arafat, yes, I extended an invitation. It is not convenient or suitable to process or progress that at this time, and there is no inconsistency whatsoever.
As you heard there, that invitation was referred to as an embarrassment of international relations by a Labor politician, Laurie Brereton. An embarrassment. Well, just today in Parliament, Albanese admitted that he had been an advocate for the Palestinian cause his whole life. He was angry that protesters had been outside the office of MPs and that they were undermining that very cause, the cause of the Palestinians. That's what he seemed most angry about today. Have a look.
I've supported justice for Palestinians my whole life and still do. It is tragic that the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people are undermined by some people engaging in activity that completely alienates the Australian public due to the nature of that. No one should be targeted for who they are. The targeting of people because they are Jewish, because people disagree with some of the actions of the Netanyahu government, are completely unacceptable. Political debate must be respectful.
Again, Albanese can't seem to mention anti-Semitism without also speaking about Islamophobia and justice for Palestinians. Have a look again at this from today.
There is no place for anti-Semitism, prejudice of any sort, Islamophobia.
Well, by contrast, Peter Dutton responded to the anti-Semitism that's gripped Australia in a very powerful way today. He gave a remarkable and moving speech that expressed utter dismay for what Jewish Australians are dealing with. And he also referred to the event that we at Sky News held and took part in on Sunday evening. It was to fight anti-Semitism. It was held at a Jewish school. Peter Dutton came and I interviewed him at that event, and that was part of his speech in Parliament today.
Last week I was at a school in Sydney where armed guards have a permanent presence to protect young children going to school, to protect young kids going to daycare centres. not because they've done anything wrong, not because their families have done anything wrong or stand for any bad cause, but because they are Jewish. That's why. And that has no place in our country whatsoever. It's not with any precedent in any other part of the country. And it needs to be condemned. And what the Prime Minister does today in condemning the actions of those who seek for their own political purposes and their own political advancement to pour fuel on this fire deserve condemnation of this chamber.
That speech was very powerful. It went for 5 minutes. That is leadership on anti-Semitism. And that is the leadership we should have seen on this scourge from the Prime Minister since October 7. Instead, we have a pro-Palestinian activist himself as Prime Minister. Someone so radical that he protested on the side of Palestinians during the Second Intifada and is now leading our country down a dangerous path where social cohesion is eroding fast.